Cressione is president of ASC Expertise, which provides training, consulting, and auditing services to the aviation, space, and defense industries. Buddy, take it away.
Hello, thank you for joining this particular session. As my intro said, my main focus has been through aviation, space, and defense, but I have been a certified QMS EMS auditor for over 20 years now, doing work as a contract auditor for different types of certification bodies, as well as for industry itself. So I was looking at what would be a good topic that would be beneficial to just regular quality management system activities. I've been hearing a lot of feedback about Clause 4 of the standard really being an area of struggle, and that's the context of the organization. So what I'd like to do today is talk a little bit about the context of the organization. And I'm going to talk about some of the relationships with regards to the different clauses within Clause 4. Talk some about the ISO 9001:2015 requirements, clarifications. There's been several clarifications that we have provided with regards to aviation, space, and defense. There are very few clarifications actually that the US Tag 176, that's the group that writes the ISO, has received. I'm on their international clarification team. And then some definitions with regards to some of the terms. Then I'll talk a little bit about how to audit, what might be potential nonconformities, and then the interdependencies. As you all know, there's lots of interdependencies and interlinkages with regard to the particular standard. So first, let's talk about some of the interrelationships. Of course, here we talk about the context understanding within Clause 4.1. We're trying to understand the purpose and strategic direction of the business. What is the business? How are we structured? How do we kind of fit in within the industry? Do we understand the industry and all of its internal and external needs or issues that exist? From that, we define then who our interested parties and what their needs and expectations are, both internal as well as external interested parties. So once we understand the business and our interested parties, then we can start defining our scope, the boundaries, the applicability of the quality management system. And once we define the scope, then obviously the process is necessary for the quality management system. So one of the things that's part of ISO 9000, as part of a definition, it says this process determines factors which influence the organization's purpose, objectives, and sustainability. So how we define information up here in Clause 4 has a bearing on everything that happens with regards to the quality management system. So if you have an issue where you didn't identify interested parties, for example, adequately, then you're going to see a cascading effect throughout the whole system. So let's start delving into some of the details. This is basically the standard, talking about Clause 4.1. And of course, we're talking about these external and internal issues that are relevant to your purpose and the strategic direction of the organization and its ability to achieve intended results. You know, these should be the big things that the organization is looking at. And of course, in the notes, and then of course, it talks about monitoring and reviewing that information. Of course, we do that within our management review activities, right? First of all, we review this material, we understand it, top management is actively engaged with this. And then of course, we, as a business, we're constantly monitoring, reviewing the information, how is it changing, and then we're reporting it during the management review. The notes, a lot of times, especially if you're an English speaker, issues can seem like negative things. So the note 1 basically says, the issues that we're talking about in the requirements can be either positive or negative factors or conditions for consideration. Then it starts talking about examples of what external contexts are, okay? Things like legal. And usually I go into a lot of detail about each one of these, but I think my next slide or two, I'm going to talk a little bit more about each one of these, looking at it from an ISO TS 9002 perspective. So what are the different types of legal requirements we have? Statutory, regulatory, with regards to our business. Technological, what kind of technology is expected? What kind of tolerances? Competitive, who are my competitors? Do I have that market niche of how we can go be successful? Market, what's the market doing? Is it growing, shrinking? Because that's going to depend upon, what's my strategies for moving forward? Cultural, usually I talk about international cultural, but even there's so many distinct differences between geographically, even within a country. It's important to understand that. Social, the social impacts, economic environment. And you see there, it looks at things from an international, national, regional, or local perspective. Then the internal context, looking at our values, culture, knowledge, performance, those things that are the external, how are we doing with regards to understanding that internally? So here are some of the other external issues that are brought up from a standpoint of ISO TS 9002. And if some of you are not familiar with that document, I would strongly recommend you go get a copy of it. So it is also written by the Technical Advisory Group, TC 176. And what it does is it kind of gives you some of the background, some of the guidance of here's kind of what we were thinking about when we wrote the ISO 9001-2015. Matter of fact, the same two co-conveners that wrote and led the effort for ISO 9001-2015 led the effort as well for ISO TS 9002. Okay, so here you see the economic factors. Talked a little bit about this on the prior chart with regards to what's happening with regards to the economics, with regards to the business, the social factors, especially these days with regards to social media and social impacts being such a drastic difference. We need to consider these things. Political factors, what's happening politically with regards to where you go do the business, technological, market, and of course, obviously, statutory regulatory. We want to make sure we stay in compliance with rules and regulations. So you compare those external factors with regards to these internal factors or issues, okay? So what's the performance of my organization? Once again, I'm from aviation, space, and defense, so we tend to think of things from a manufacturing perspective. But if I have a certain tolerance that's expected by my customers, is my organization capable of producing that? Do I have the equipment necessary to be able to produce at that level? Do I have the appropriate infrastructure, environment for my processes, the organizational knowledge? And if not, how am I going to go get that organizational knowledge? How am I going to go get the right equipment? The human aspects, such as competence of persons, organizational behavior, culture, relationships with unions, the people aspect. Just because we might have performance and the resources, we can't forget about the people. The people is what makes it happen. Also, operational factors such as processes, production and service, provision capabilities, the performance, the customer satisfaction. Once again, I want to be successful. So how do I match up with regards to expectations? And then also with regard to governance, the procedures, the rules, the organizational structure. Are we structured in such a way that we can go be successful? So take a couple steps back. Recognize that if we don't do a good job up front with regards to these external and internal factors, all right, that are relevant to the purpose and strategic direction, it can definitely affect our results that we achieve as an organization and the success we achieve as an organization. We want to make sure that this context is well articulated. And some of you may say, well, wait a minute, buddy. Articulated, it's not required to be documented. And you're right. As part of 4.1, you are correct. It is not required to be documented information. I highly recommend it. Many organizations have this information, these artifacts, in like a strategic plan. Matter of fact, was at a facility here recently where I was talking to top management about understanding the context. And he said, let me take out our strategic plan, and I carry it in my briefcase because wherever I go, I want to make sure my decisions are consistent with the vision, mission, and objectives of the organization. That's what we want. We want people to be able to, and leadership, to be able to craft this vision and then make sure that decisions are being consistently with that. This is not an exercise where we go develop some documentation and then go put it in a drawer. Take it back out in a year and say, how'd we do? Also, external and internal factors change over time. We need to have monitoring mechanisms in place to check to see what's happening with the industry, what's happening with the market, what's happening with technology, regulations, to make sure that we look at how changes are occurring so we can be adept, because we want organizational sustainability at the end of the day. And of course, that's one of the things that's required to be discussed in management review. So here's some helpful information for understanding the context. All right. Some people would put this information into things called business plans, strategic plans. It can include competitor analysis, economic reports from business sectors. What am I hearing based upon my particular business? Is there some kind of group out there that's monitoring what's happening from an overall business perspective? Some organizations use SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, PEST, the political, economic, social, technological, or PESTLE as different tools. Of course, once again, these are only tools that exist. Once again, once you develop the tools, then what do you do with the data? Make sure that you're looking at the data. Because of course, as you're identifying the context, it should become quite obvious then who some of those key interested parties are. Here's what my scope is going to be. Here's what my processes need to be. And also, of course, don't forget risk, 6.1, risk and opportunities, risk-based thinking. Especially as I identify, going through this exercise, it's going to identify, here's some opportunities for me to go exploit. Here's some risks that I have within my current structure. So how to go audit this and potential nonconformities? I always like understanding how the organization went about identifying its context. Humorous. I provided a class here recently, and the people said, you know what, from what context are we supposed to go put together this context, okay? And they made the comment that some of their quality people got together and they developed the context of the organization. And they hashed through it, and they finally came out with a product they were real happy with and real proud of. So they shared it with the cross-functional team. And they got people from engineering, production, marketing, purchasing, and so forth involved. They're like, that's not the context. So then they got those people together, they hashed through it, they came up with something they were real proud of, and then they presented to leadership. And leadership's like, that's not the context of the organization. So you do it from a lens of leadership, okay? So that's why I want to see, when I talk to people, when I go do audits, I always want to talk about who is identified in that process, because you need to have it from a leadership perspective, okay? In aviation, space, and defense, all right, for AS 9100 here in the Americas, we're required to interview top management annually, at least, okay? So this is a great topic for your top management interview. This is the kind of stuff that top management does day in and day out, to understand all these different indicators. Also, is the context consistent with how they're identifying their interested parties? You should see some kind of alignment of these different types of activities. And then also, is this context document information? Now, obviously, this is sensitive information. So even if somebody shares with me, here's our strategic plan, usually I'll look at it from a very high level, scan the table of contents, look to see what kind of things are being included in there, because there are certain sensitivities with regards to where they're going strategically as an organization. Then, of course, as I said already, that in management review, you're required to comment or have input with regards to changes to external and internal issues. Some interdependencies. What's great about this is, look at that, clause 01C. So even before we get to the requirements sections, we're already talking about risk and opportunities associated with context and objectives. 4.3, we talk about the scope. Your scope should be based on understanding the context of what you are. 5.1.1 with regards to leadership, and 5.2.1, the quality policy and the objectives are compatible with the context. Once again, going back to this 4.1 and the strategic direction. So you're looking for alignment, risk and opportunities, right? As I said, as we're going through this activity, we'll be identifying risk and opportunities. 9.3.2, management review. And then, of course, you can just see really the entire standard. If as an organization, you don't get this right, okay, you're pursuing business that is not achievable, that you will not be successful, you will not be successful as a quality management system, and the organization will not be successful. So I can't stress enough about the importance of this from an organizational sustainability perspective. Now, sometimes I get people who make the comment, our top management is not happy. They don't understand, how is this applicable to a quality management system? And so I asked them a question. So when you go out and you look at your supplier base, okay, one of the things you look at is to check out the viability of that supplier. You look at their quality management system, you look at their past performance, you try to get information from others, but you also do a financial analysis. You look at longevity. You want those people to be in business for the long term. Isn't that what we're getting at here with understanding the context? Making sure that our organization is structured such that we are pursuing the right areas, we're positioning ourselves properly so we can be a sustainable enterprise to be able to go provide quality products and services to our customers on time for the long term. Okay? So that's 4.1. Let's now talk about 4.2. One of the things I did, and you can see the areas I want to stress because of the bold underline, of course, but you notice this starts off with due to their effect or potential effect. Doesn't mean necessarily I need to identify every single possible scenario with regard to interested parties or the most remote interested party. Of course, when we talk in the standard, we only talk about relevant interested parties. So due to their effect or potential effect on the organization's ability to consistently provide products and services that meet customer and applicable statutory and regulatory requirements, you can determine interested parties that are relevant. What are those requirements associated with those interested parties? And then you're going to monitor and review information about those interested parties and their relevant requirements. So who is an interested party? It's kind of humorous because whenever people ask me, hey, Buddy, is interested party the same thing as stakeholder? I'm like, no, not really, because interested party is broader. Then, of course, you go to ISO 9000, and what is the top definition? Stakeholder, okay? But it goes on to say, person or organization that can affect, be affected by, or perceive itself to be affected by a decision or activity of the organization. So who's obviously the most important stakeholder, the most important interested party? The customer. So the example you see here within ISO lists them first, owners. So if we have those that have a financial interest in the business, are they impacted by the quality management system? Absolutely. People in an organization, the employees. Why on earth would you go develop a quality management system that didn't take the people in the organization as a key component? How do we make it such that people in the organization understand, can go perform work so our system is successful? Providers, suppliers, okay? Interesting, when I first started off in aviation, space, and defense, if you looked at the price of an airplane, whether you're talking Boeing, Lockheed, Northrop Grumman, 70 to 80% of the cost back 20, 30 years ago was from those major OEMs. Now it's flip-flopped. 70 to 80% of the cost of an aircraft is now supplier cost, all right? So how do we partner with them? How do we work together to make sure that the end item meets all the requirements? Especially as an organization, I'm responsible for the quality of their parts as well as what I add to those particular parts. Other examples, bankers, regulators, especially with regards to aviation, space, and defense. We have requirements from the FAA. We have requirements from DOD, from the military side, unions, partners of society that could include competitors or opposing pressure groups. So a little bit more about this. Obviously, it extends beyond the customer. I know it says in the standard that the organization gets to identify the interested parties, but as auditors, we need to make sure that they're looking broadly enough. So if somebody says, oh, we have interested parties, it's the customer, them alone. Then as an auditor, I would expect you to ask questions like, don't you have any outsourcing? Do you have suppliers? Do you have employees? And kind of going through some of those things we discussed on the prior chart to try to understand, why did you not include those particular interested parties? Understanding the context of the organization is to identify interested parties. A lot of times I'll see organizations develop tables, and what they'll do is they'll start with the context, and then how does that relate to interested parties? And then with regards to what are some of the issues and concerns of that? How does that then flow into risk and opportunities? Relevant interested parties provide significant risk to organizational sustainability if their needs and expectations are not met. So we want to make sure that we identify interested parties, not, once again, that have the impact to our system. If we don't listen to this group, it's going to have a major impact. Organization define what results are necessary to deliver those relevant interested parties to reduce that risk. So that's why you can see so many of these linkages between interested parties, upstream context, downstream risk. Organizations attract, capture, and retain the support of relevant interested parties they depend on for their success. There's a certain partnership. So with regards to the system itself, you need to make sure that in identifying, your inputs, okay, if you think about it, you can almost include here as being the activity as part of your quality management system. So what's the inputs associated with it? Things such as the scope, the market, what's the regulations, external interested parties' needs and requirements, internal interested parties, the capability and limitations associated with that. Then you identify the affected processes from an operations, infrastructure, support process, right? Here's your processes that those groups have an impact on. So how to go audit? First, how do the organization identify its interested parties? With regards to that, from an aviation, space, and defense, we actually have requirements where that activity is required to be documented. So we understand who the interested parties are and how they're relevant. Once again, who is engaged in identifying the interested parties? This is, once again, it's a good topic for the top management interview. Who are they? How are they relevant, and how are they relevant with regards to influencing your quality management system? How are you determining the needs and expectations? How are you monitoring those things? Do you have somebody off, for example, if one of yours is regulators, how are you keeping up to date on regulations that are coming down the pipe? All right. How are you working with your customers? How are you working with your suppliers? Are the interested parties consistent with the context? And is this documented information? Some other interdependencies, obviously, our interested parties has a direct relationship with regards to my quality management system scope there in 4.3b. 442b, so you may say, wait a minute, there's no 442b. In aviation, space, and defense, we actually have a requirement to maintain that as document information. I apologize, I thought I took all the aerospace specific requirements out of here, okay? 522c, we have a requirement that the quality policy be made available to interested parties. 7.4, communication. You won't see the word interested parties within clause 7.4. But think about it. How am I determining needs and expectations of my interested parties? I better be communicating with them in some way to be able to understand. So a good litmus test with regards to internal and external communications is to see, am I capturing all my interested party information? 832I, the level of control during design and development planning, have to consider my interested party inputs. 871, timely reporting of nonconformities. If I have some nonconformities that affect some interested parties, how am I going to go make sure that they're understanding the potential impact? I'm alerting them such that product safety, human lives are not impacted. 832, management review inputs. Consider interested party feedback, right? It now says, what is the customer feedback and interested party feedback? So once again, the entire standard. If we don't get this right, then we're not including a whole view of my interested parties, and my system will not be optimized. It will not be fully successful. 4.3, talking about the quality management system scope. Here's where we're determining the boundaries, applicabilities. You see that we need to consider external and internal issues, the 4.1, the interested parties, 4.2, the products and services of the organizations. All right, we need to determine these requirements and then make sure that we consider those with regard to the scope. The scope needs to be available, maintained as documented information, right? It's the scope of our system, it's those boundaries, and providing justifications for not applicable. All right, within aviation, space, and defense, for example, we have, of course, we've opened up the aperture for applicability or non-applicability. And we're making sure that our stakeholders, our certified organizations, truly do not have these as applicable before they can take it out of their particular system. Once again, if it's not applicable, it cannot affect the organization's ability, responsibility to ensure product and service conformity, customer satisfaction. So what is the quality management system scope? Who is engaged in determining the scope? Once again, a good topic for a top management interview. Making sure you understand those boundaries. It needs to be consistent with the context, interested parties, products, and services. If there's any not applicables, are they appropriately justified? How do we make the scope available and maintain this documented information? Those are all good topics for audit and potential nonconformities. The interdependencies, obviously the whole standard. If we haven't identified the scope properly, okay, we're not going to understand the boundaries. We're not going to have an effective, cohesive quality management system. Last clause we're going to talk about today, 4.4, quality management system and its processes. It's still amazing to me that the process-based approach was introduced back in 2000, and some organizations still don't get it. We have really emphasized this with regards to AS9100, I should say AS9100 series, and made sure that we have things called PAIR forms, process effectiveness assessment reports, where we look at the organization's process, where we look at what's the inputs, what's the outputs, what are the infrastructure, what is the people, what are the controls, what are the measures to make sure that it's effective. The system needs to make sure that we're looking at applicable customer, statutory, regulatory requirements. Then you can see, how do you really understand the process? Do you understand the inputs required, the outputs expected? We've taught all of our aviation, space, and defense auditors to examine things also, or many CBs have, to examine things from a turtle diagram perspective to make sure that we truly understand what the processes are. From an organizational standpoint, I used to tell my organization, if you're trying to understand your process, if you want to be able to have the answer for just about any question an auditor can go throw at you, go to a detailed turtle diagram, and you're going to understand your processes. You'll be able to respond to those questions. What's the sequence and interaction of these processes? In aviation, space, and defense, once again, that's how we audit things. That's what our audit plan is based off of. If your audit plan does not correlate back to that interaction of processes, all right, it will not be adequate. The criteria, methods needed to ensure effective operation and control, the resources needed to make sure that they're available. Who's responsible? Once again, who's that process owner that's responsible for the process to make sure that it's operating effectively? How do we address risk and opportunities with regards to our processes? Tying once again to 6.1, how do we evaluate those to make sure they achieve their intended results? How do we improve? And then obviously we need to have documented information to support the operation of our processes and retained document information. I really like the fact that ISO has these two bullets. It's kind of interesting because a lot of organizations are like, hey, we need to, back in the ISO 9001, 2008, quality manual, 6 documented procedures. All right. And now, I don't know of too many organizations, except very small ones, that have that. They have documented information to support their processes where they want to see controls, uniformity. All right. And that's what we're talking about here. The next, retain document information, records. I remember back when we used to have C424 throughout the whole standard, and people thought that's the only place I need to go have a record. No, you need to have records or retain document information to have confidence that the processes are being carried out as planned. So making sure you understand the quality management system processes. Critical before you even go on site. Are they documented in a sequence and interactions? Does it make sense? Can I go put together an audit plan based upon that? One of the things we're seeing from aviation, space, and defense as we do a Pareto analysis of our findings, we're seeing more and more findings in this 4.4 where organizations don't have adequate details to be able to go draft that audit plan. So we're saying, hey, your interaction of processes is not fully comprehensive from a quality management system perspective. Because once again, it's up for the organization to define. How are the inputs and the outputs expected to determine? What are the responsibilities, authorities for these processes? What are the performance indicators? Once again, the new standard is all about results. How do we ensure results? What's the targets for our processes to see if we're achieving those planned results? What actions are taken if intended results are not achieved? With regards to, once again, our pair forms in aerospace, we have a 3x3 matrix where we look at, are we achieving our results? Or if we're not, are we taking actions? Or if we're not achieving our results and no actions, you score very poorly, you get a nonconformity. Compare that to the issues that we identified during the audit. And from that, we determine a score from 1 to 5, looking at, process maturity. Are adequate resources available for the process? Have we considered risk and opportunities with regard to this process? Do we have document information? If we have this structure, do we have document information that support the process structure and explains the process structure? How is retained document information records captured that we actually are doing what we're saying that we're doing, all right? That we have the evidence that we're performing with regards to our system. Interdependencies, once again, the entire standard. So this is kind of interesting. And we did this from a 9100 perspective, all right? So we looked at what are some of the words with regards to the process approach, things like process, output, monitor, effective, performance, and so forth. And how many times were those words called out in 2009? You can see the count. All right, now look at the 2016, all right? Obviously, the 2016 based upon ISO 9001:2015. Look at the number of increases. So we had 360 times we talked about processes in 2009 to 610 times now, almost twice as much. So if you're not doing a process-based audit, if you're not auditing based upon processes, and the organization is not thinking that way, they're totally missing the boat with regards to how the standard is structured, where it's heading, the emphasis of it. And the beauty of this is that it's value added for the organization. I remember back in the old days when I first got started with this, and you'd be brought into a room with all these 3-ring binders full of procedures. And when you opened up the binder, they were either covered with dust because nobody ever used them, or you opened up the binder and it creaked because it was like the first time it ever got opened. All right. Now organizations get to have their system based upon their processes. So it's value added. So it's integrated with how they run the business. All right. So once again, make sure your organizations, the organizations you audit, are looking at things from an effective process perspective. Throw this in here. This is an example of a turtle diagram. And I don't care if you use a turtle diagram, whether you use SciPox, all right? Just different tools to understand the process. So I'll go ahead and do a turtle. Here's your process, and you can decompose the process. What are the inputs? what resources are required, who is required, so what's the competency requirements, what the methods, how is it done, it could be procedures, what's the results and the output of your particular process. In summary, the context of the organization, fundamental to understanding and operation of the management system. Clauses build upon one another, not only 1 through 4, all right, 4.1 to 4.4, but the whole standard is built upon these. You need to look at it from the top management perspective. This is excellent topics to talk to top management about. These topics interrelate, have dependencies throughout the entire standard. So I hope you found this session to be informative, and I wish you success in your implementation as well as your auditing of quality management systems.
This ends today's presentation. Thanks for attending.